Hey everybody, today I have another skill breakdown for you. This time I'm going to be covering Sir Mordred, the main character, the character that everyone's probably going to be using the most on any given run, given that he's required for a lot of the missions. Honestly, I thought I did this one before, but I was kind of going through my recordings and stuff, looking at the things I've done, what I still need to cover. And I was surprised to see that Mordred was not one of the ones I had covered already. I think maybe part of me figured everyone's gonna kind of see everything he has, so why do I need to cover him? But, why not? I can still cover him, and for any players that are curious about what stuff that may be in store for them, this may be useful for them to help pique their interest. And also, while I don't necessarily do this in the style of like, you should take this and that, I have a different video for that. I do kind of give some brief thoughts and opinions on certain skills, so I can still cover that as well. Starting in Tier 1, as usual, there's just the basic strike attack for 3 AP, and there's nothing really fancy about this. A lot of the defenders have the exact same version of this. The first upgrade is Bleeding Strike, so you can apply some bleed. There's Killing Blow, so you get an AP back when you actually get a kill with this attack. Bone Breaker, just for 15% flat bonus damage. And Sweeping Strike, gain 1 AP for the first strike attack on each enemy. Now, out of all of these two are probably the most universally useful over the course of the entire game, while I think these two are definitely more useful early. Your defenders can get a good amount of kills earlier on when the HP bars are lower, but that becomes a bit of a harder ask as you get later into the game. So if you take it early, you may find yourself respecking it because you're going to stop getting a lot of use out of it. And the same kind of goes for bleed, unless you really have stuff that's stacking and giving a lot of bonuses to bleed damage. This doesn't usually end up being a whole lot, especially coming from a defender. The flat damage, of course, will always be useful, and personally, Sweeping Strikes I think is really good. It can definitely enable your defender to get an extra action in, or two, depending on how many enemies that he's surrounded by. So this one's definitely solid. The best ability in the tier, though, for every defender, is Shield Charge. His first active skill. It's amazing. Good range, very cheap, knockback and knockdown. If they're immune to knockdown, at least it knocks them back, most enemies at least. It's just a really good utility, very good defensively and offensively. I only ever really take 2 of the upgrades on this. The first one is Shield Spikes, 25% more damage. There is some use for this, maybe earlier in the game, but even then, I don't find myself using this for damage very often. It does come up, so it's not a bad pick, but definitely another one I think you move away from as you get higher level. Wade Charge, much more important though. Being able to do this as frequently as possible by reducing the cooldown, very, very good. I find myself wishing I had Shield Charge off of cooldown in many different cases and scenarios. Extended Charge, that extra range, it's just a great AP saver, so you don't have to take that extra step to then charge to reach them. It's pretty self-explanatory. And Momentum, if you get a kill, resets the cooldown. Kind of the same reason why I don't really like Shield Spikes a whole lot, and by the time you get this, it's at level 10, when this 4th upgrade slot unlocks on abilities. By that point, you've kind of reached the part of the game where you're not doing a lot of damage, you're not getting kills with Shield Charge, hardly ever. Next is Stigma. This is a unique skill to him as a defender. Only one other character in the game shares it. It's a powerful debuff, good range, very cheap, and it applies the vulnerability debuff. As I'm looking at this now, that 20% was not always pink, so I guess this does scale with Hex Intensity now, so that's good for your Arcanist. Irrelevant to Mordred, it'll just be 20%. And with the first upgrade, it goes up to 30%. That's obviously very, very good. Increasing the duration is good too. There's a lot of times with Mordred, due to how restrictive the AP can be with your heavy armor user sometimes, where being able to cast it this turn and let it carry over into the next, very useful. Wasting Sign, it breaks some armor off. This isn't bad. If you find your party is maybe struggling with breaking armor off, you may want this one. But if you're running a champion, usually this isn't a big deal. And then Mind Shackle, reduce the cost by 1. On the other character that has this, the Arcanist, not necessary. For Mordred, it definitely is. Getting this down to 1 AP instead of 2 is a huge deal. Annealing is a very solid passive, another one that I think just you don't really need quite as much later in the game, but it's still not bad to have, having some self-sustain, regaining HP on hit. At max level, it's 7 HP per hit. With the first upgrade, Endurance is 10% Vitality from accessories and trinkets, kind of Extra HP and Physical Resistance, both of these are really good though. 5% more HP, 15% Physical Debuff Resist. You can really make your defender quite tanky with a lot of skills, as you'll see. And with Ruthlessness, 7 HP on a kill, so if you hit someone and get a kill, that's 14 HP, which isn't bad. That's, you know, what is that, like 8-9%-ish of his total HP on a kill? That's not bad, but you will be a little hard-pressed to get some kills later in the game. Strength is just 10% more weapon damage. Vigilance, reduce the damage from opportunity attacks in Overwatch. This one actually is fairly decent. I do eat opportunity attacks a lot on my defender. Earlier on in the game, it's more of a big deal. Later in the game, I mean, you can see the raw stats over here. They become so tanky. You can take it, and you won't really suffer much consequences for it. Robust is a pretty standard, just tankiness boost. 10% more HP and Vitality. As we move on to Tier 2, it's a very offensive tier from Mordred. That's kind of what I like about him. Some people don't like having to bring him on every single mission, and I kind of get that. People want to be able to mess around in freeform, but at least Mordred, compared to a lot of the other defenders, he does feel very unique to me. He's a much more offensive and spellcastery based defender, and I just think that's really cool. The first ability he has is Cleave. 120% weapon damage. This is the defender version, so that's why it's 120 instead of 70, I think, the base for champions. And AoE is always useful, so this is definitely an ability you can take early, and you'll probably run it for a while. Depending on how you want to build him, if you want to make him super tanky, you'll probably move away from this later, but if you want him to keep some decent offensive capability, this is a good one to have. The first upgrade with Bleeder, just more bleed damage, kind of the same thing as what I said for Bleeding Strike on the Strike ability. Severing Blow, 20% extra damage to the center target, so kind of depending on how you aim it, you can maybe get a little extra damage in, make it a stronger hit to a single target than a basic strike. Momentum is plus 15% damage for the entire thing, so that's a pretty good stack there for, like I said, trying to get extra damage to a single target, even if you're only using Cleave on one target. And Hack and Slash, some knockback. I'm always kind of on the fence for this one, because sometimes it's a pain when you knock him back, because then you're like, now I need to send other guys to go after him to hit him. But other times you want to make space for your party because they're getting all bunched up on. So if you are using Cleave, this one I think is going to be kind of up to every player and kind of deciding, is this being more annoying for me, or am I actually really getting advantage of the space this is creating? Something to pay attention to. Next is Flurry. This is just, it's kind of like Cleave, but they don't need to be next to each other. Personally, I prefer Cleave. There are sometimes cases where there's an enemy both, to the left and right. Cleave can't hit both, but Flurry can. But generally speaking, I just prefer Cleave, and I don't think it's worth taking both of them. The upgrades on it, though, are decent. You have Armor Breaker, so now it has 30% armor breaking. And so good armor break is useful, again, especially if you're not using a champion. They're kind of the main armor breaker class in the game. Zestful Flurry, if you kill a unit, you gain 1 AP, so in theory, if you manage to land 3 kills, you get 3 AP back, so this, costs 1 AP total, but the odds of you getting that are pretty slim. I would not bank on that. And I mentioned 3 targets because there's the extended flurry. Got a little ahead of myself here. It targets 1 additional enemy, so it goes up to 3 enemies instead of 2. And then, of course, Dismemberment, extra 15% weapon damage. If you're going to use this, you're obviously going to want the extra damage, as this plays very directly into all of the other upgrades on it. Like I said, if you're gonna take an offensive melee ability, I would pick one or the other. I personally pick Cleave, but I do know some other people like Flurry, and it's not a bad choice. Next is Armorer. It's a must-have passive. It reduces the AP penalty from heavy armor by 1. So as you can see here, by equipping this armor, he has minus 2 AP. So if we dequip this, you'll see his pool goes up to 9. Instead of 10, because we already have it being reduced by 1. If that was a 1 AP penalty armor, then he would be at 9 the entire time, even when he is wearing the armor. All of the upgrades on this are pretty solid. The fitted armor ones aren't the best, because if you want the extra HP, you're better to just pick up a robust, because it's all in one place. But the thick skinned is great. An extra 8 armor here, armor is amazing, it goes a long way for damage reduction. Next, however, is another unique skill of his, shared only with his mother, Morgoth, and it's an absolutely amazing skill, one of the best in the game, I think. Thunderbolt. It has phenomenal range, low cooldown, and a little high on the AP cost, but I think it's well worth it. 125% weapon damage, so it's a decent hitting move. Not anything amazing, but it ignores cover and armor, and it can't be blocked. It's just great. You just pick someone on the map within 10 tiles, and you just zap them. The first upgrade does increase the range by 2, bringing it up to 10. Definitely something you want to grab early on this. Thunder Wrath, plus 25% weapon damage, so bringing it up to 150, that's pretty good, and definitely makes it fairly hard hitting, honestly. Damage Conductor, reduce the armor by 7, so another armor break ability. And then Thunder Blast. This is something I think you're going to want to get on this. It increases the cost up to 6 from 5, but now it stuns. So now you have a 10 range stun that can't be blocked, ignores cover, and ignores armor. It's great. That's all there is to it. It's great. Low cooldown. It's so good. The last two passives is Strong-Willed, 30% mental debuff resist. This isn't bad. It's a large amount of mental debuff resist. Helps make your defender just resilient to all sorts of effects. And then another robust, there's one of these in each tier. Moving on to tier 3, we have the first active skill of the tier, and it's Recuperate. This is a common skill for defenders, and it's a low cost 2 AP for turn cooldown. Grant 50 temporary HP for 1 turn. That's a lot of temporary HP. You can see over here if we re-equip his armor. That's like 33% roughly, a little less, maybe 30% of his HP. That's a huge boost, but I don't really think it's a great skill. I know I've had some other players say, man, they love it. I mean, if you love it and you use it and you get mileage out of it, cool. I'm glad you do. In my personal experience and the way I play, it just seems sort of unnecessary. You can see the stats here that I have. With the exception of like Baelor's power attack in the endgame, Mordred is never in any real threat of dying once you get later in the game. And in tier 3, you're kind of nearing that point where your defenders are becoming some real powerhouses, and having to worry about them dying becomes a very minimal issue for a lot of players. But if you do choose to use it, it has some great upgrades, such as Regained Armor, so now they get plus 8 armor for the duration, which is huge. An extra 25 temporary HP, so now it's 75. Gaining 30% mental debuff resist, so even more resilient to, status effects, and increase the duration for 2 turns. This is probably the best one out of all of them. 1 turn, sometimes you use it and then you don't even get hit, and it can feel like a waste. At least with 2 turns, there's more likelihood you'll get some mileage out of it. Next is a great passive for resisting those debuffs, and it's All Resistance, 15% to both types of debuff resistance. The upgrades on it are very good as well. Physical Resist and Mental Fort for an additional 15% of each. Dot Resistance, -1 turn duration for Bleed, Burn, and Poison. Not really a big deal. Again, your defenders are so tanky, this isn't a big deal for them damage-wise. And Extra Vitality, just Extra Vitality and an injury token. This one you definitely don't need. You already have 3 injury tokens, and you're so tanky, you're not getting a lot of hits to your Vitality. Like I said, just them dying is not a big worry for me. Next is Shield Block, which just increases block by 5%, which is amazing. Block is such an incredibly powerful stat for damage mitigation. And 5% may not seem like a lot, but there's a good amount of gear that stacks with it, and you can get that up to a very respectable number, 50% easily. And the upgrades on it can be a little situational depending on the gear you get, but Shield Superiority is 5% while outnumbered. A lot of players put their defenders into positions where they have a lot of enemies around them, so there's pretty good uptime on this. Flank defense, so now if enemies are to the left and right, you at least still block some of the damage, but if you get some gear that has you turn to face them, then obviously you'll want to reassign the skill point. Stalwart Defender is one I always take though. 5% block at full HP, and it just lowers as you reach 0 HP. You spend a lot of time at fairly close to full HP with your defenders once they're fully functional. And First Strike. If you're going to block an attack, instead you take no damage, at least for the first hit from an enemy in the encounter. But it is from each enemy, so this can block a good amount of damage, just outright. His last active skill, another absolutely phenomenal one, also shared by his mother, Chain Lightning. One of the best skills in the game, I think. Doesn't have, a super high cost. The cooldown is, 4, but that's, I think respectable, and you can still use this twice in an encounter sometimes. And good damage, and just the ability to target so many different enemies that can be so far spread out. It's just great. And the upgrades make it even more so. With the first one of Fulgurous Whip, you can now hit 4 targets instead of 3. Next up is Swift Bolt, which reduces the cost by 2. The initial cost of this is 6, which does seem like a lot, so you're definitely going to want this to bring it down to 4. It says 5, we'll get to that in a second. Probably the first upgrade you're going to want to get, as, 4 AP is amazing. 6, not so much. Electric Power, an extra 20% weapon damage, and this may not seem like a whole lot of damage per target sometimes, but when you add up the total damage you're dealing, 40 damage to each once all of a sudden, that's 160. That's really good. And then Scourge of Mordred raises the cost by 1, but now it applies Shock. That's what brings it up to 5 instead of 4. Applying Shock to 4 targets, Shock is one of the strongest debuffs in the game, and due to the targeting of Chain Lightning, you can hit such a widespread number of units and apply Shock to them. It just makes this ability so good. It's easily one of the best debuffing abilities in the game. Lastly is Strength, just another 10%, as well as a 3rd Robust, and then Hardened Armor. So now armor loss is reduced by 20%, and this 38 armor here, or however much your defender has, just really gets some extra mileage out of it. And that is all I have for Mordred. He's a very strong defender. He has some strong debuff ability here, some good CC in the form of Stigma, Thunderbolt, Chain Lightning, and he's just as tanky as any of the other defenders, and that's just what I like about him. It really stands out, I think. His ability to have magic and that range capability does a good job of weakening and controlling your enemies, so the rest of your party can just really lay into them, or protect them in less standard ways. He may not be able to taunt, but if he can shock 4 enemies, so they now have 50% less AP, now all of a sudden they can't even reach you in the first place to attack them at all, or maybe they can move up but can't get the attack in. Or he can stun an enemy that's in the back, a troublesome spellcaster or an archer or something. It's not quite as easy to use as, just moving the guy up and pressing taunt, but I think it can definitely be just as effective as a lot of the other defenders, or nearly, in the right hands. And that's Mordred. That's what he has. I hope this was informative or useful to any players out there, and thanks for watching.